Okay, so I think let's start. Those people that come in a bit late, I'm sure we'll be able to pick up. So I know Rabbi Uzvolk already started brief conversations, just some banter, some chatter with a few of you. So Rabbi Uzvolk certainly doesn't need an introduction, and certainly not in our Medina, in our neighborhood. But just for formalities, Rabbi Uzvolk is the rabbi of Victory Park Shul. He also is a certified sofer, and we'll go on to next week, please God, to speak more about the role of a sofer, particularly in the writing of Sifrei Torah, etc. Tonight was going to be a talk honing in on Tefillin. We as men have the mitzvah of wearing Tefillin. Often we don't really know what goes into the Tefillin. What does Tefillin comprise? And I had the privilege when we got our Tefillin, thank God for our son, our eldest son, Avi from Rabbi Uzvolk. He does the most wonderful presentation for bar mitzvah boys or boys approaching their bar mitzvah, to give it meaning, to give it substance, to really what are they putting on, what really goes into the Tefillin. And for that moment, it just, this light bulb went off in my mind that I'd love to get Rabbi Uzvolk to give that same sort of shiur demonstration to a wider audience. Rabbi Uzvolk, aside from being the rabbi of Victory Park Shul, he's also a good friend of mine and a senior colleague. Really, we go back many, many years. His dear family as well. So it gives me really great pleasure. I don't want to take away from his time. And I'm so glad. Thank you, Rabbi Uzvolk. You really didn't even hesitate when I asked you if you'd give these two talks. So thank you so much for agreeing to share of your knowledge and your expertise with us tonight. And we look forward to listening. And just as we always do, there will be an opportunity for questions. If you have any questions after the presentation, please feel free to raise any questions. I give over to Rabbi Uzvolk.
Okay, so firstly, Rabbi Richards, thank you so much for the invitation and for putting it together and being the forum for the talk, the class to take place. And I hope that I do it justice. I must say that giving a talk for Emerential Shul, I'd expect as part of the audience to see Wendy Roth, and I want to dedicate the shiur tonight for her recovery, for her merit. She should have a complete recovery. What is her Hebrew name again? There's a Ze'eva
Brocha Bat Belka.
But Melka or Belka?
Belka.
Ze'eva Brocha Bat Belka. No, she should have a refuah shleima, and especially that we're going to be talking about tefillin and tefillin of the head. So everything in the head should be right and everything should be good. Okay, so going into the tefillin, there's so many different angles to approach the subject, the topic, and one of them is that this is so clearly an area where we need the oral Torah to move. Without the oral Torah, we'd be totally stuck. All that the Torah tells us in the Torah Shebichtav, the written part of the Torah, it says in 4 different places. It says basically, Ukshartam leot al yadecha, tie them on your hand, v'hayule totafot beinenecha. And there'll be these totafot beinenecha. That's really a bit of a variation. In another place it says vayule zikaron beinenecha or beinechem. So you are all familiar, hopefully, with 2 places where the tefillin appear, where the mitzvah of tefillin appears, and that's in the first 2 paragraphs of the Shema, right? Ve'ahavta, etc. Ukshartam leot al yadecha, and then later on, also in Ve'hayim Shamoa, ukshartem otam leot al yedchem, va'yule totavot beinechem. But there's another 2 places where it comes actually earlier, in the end of Parshat Bo, to do with the redemption of a firstborn son. There it also speaks about tefillin. So there are 4 actual, what we call paragraphs, and in Hebrew, parshiyot, where the mitzvah of tefillin is spoken about. But without the oral law, we don't know what tefillin are. It's what must you tie on your hand? What must you put on your head? And what does it mean when it says put them on your hand? Does it mean that you put them on the palm of your hand? I mean, that is what a hand is really. We know we actually put them on the zroa, right? On the arm, but it says yadcha, beineinecha, between your eyes. We don't put tefillin between the eyes. We put them corresponding to between the eyes. Without the Torah shebe'al peh, the oral Torah, we really stuck. And that's everything about the tefillin and everything that we're going to try to learn tonight. The color of the tefillin, the shape of the tefillin, the way the tefillin are put together. It all comes back to the oral Torah. And in fact, the Gemara, when it talks about tefillin, it often uses the expression of halacha leMoshe miSinai, which means this is what Moshe Rabbeinu was told at Har Sinai. Almost like we don't know why, but this is what he was told. Halacha leMoshe miSinai, he was told at Har Sinai that this is the way the tefillin need to be, and that was passed down. That means that when Moshe Rabbeinu came down the mountain and made his own tefillin and instructed the Jewish people to make tefillin and to put on tefillin, this is what he told them to do. And that is an amazing chain and connection that we have. Because if we were to open, and we open up our own boxes of tefillin to have them checked, or to make them, to put the things inside, put them together. If we were to open up the pair of tefillin of Moshe Rabbeinu, we'd find the same. We'd find the same details in his tefillin. Every single detail of the tefillin goes all the way back to halacha leMoshe miSinai. And what we're going to see tonight is some of these nuances where every aspect has got meaning and reason. So I hope that on the camera we'll be able to actually see the tefillin, because it really is a hands-on need to see. If we were sitting around the table, so then we'd actually pass some tefillin around. And maybe before I proceed, so I know that there's some ladies that are listening to the shiur, and then the question is, so what are you doing around here? How does it relate to ladies? So if we open up the Shulchan Aruch, it tells us as follows. It tells us what the intent of the tefillin should be. Yechavein ba'anachat tefillin. A person should have the following kavanah. It's very rare that the Shulchan Aruch tells us actually what to have, what kavanah, what intention to have when we are doing the mitzvah. Now, I want to suggest that the women who don't put on the tefillin, because it is a positive mitzvah bound by time, it is limited to daytime, and it is specifically in weekdays and not on Shabbos and Yom Tov. So it is a positive mitzvah bound by time, and therefore women are exempt. But the kavanah, the intention of the mitzvah, for sure they should have as well. And in fact, without being patronizing, but it is patronizing, one of the explanations as to the fact that women don't fulfill the positive mitzvahs bound by time is because they are able to reach the meaning of the mitzvah without doing it tangibly. Because actually on a spiritual level, women are on a higher level than men. Women say in the morning brachot, She'asani kirtzono, you created me with your absolute desire will. That is the will of God. Okay, but enough, that's a shiur for another time. But the kavanah of the tefillin, let's see what it says in the Shulchan Aruch. So I quote, I've got the Shulchan Aruch in front of me, and I'm just going to read. One should have in mind when he puts on tefillin that HaKadosh Baruch Hu commanded us to write these 4 parshas, these 4 paragraphs that I spoke about before, that contain in them the unity of God's name, will, that Shema Yisrael, Hashem Echad, the unity of God's name, V'yitziat Mitzrayim. And it also talks about the fact that Hashem took us out of Egypt. especially the first two paragraphs that are at the end of Parshat Bo, and to place them on the arm corresponding to the heart, and on the head corresponding to the brain, so that we will remember, and here's the intention, so that we will remember the miracles and wonders that God did with us. And these miracles and wonders indicate, they point to the unity of God, and that he has the power and the authority to behave, to do in the higher worlds and in the lower worlds as he desires. Right? That God came and took control over the greatest world power at the time. And furthermore, Yeshabed la'akadosh baruch hu, a person should subjugate to God haneshama, his soul, which resides in the brain, and also the lusts and the desires and the thoughts of his heart to his service. And by putting on the tefillin, a person will remember the Creator and decrease, curtail his desires. So that is something that definitely, that kavanah of the unity of God and the realization that Hashem has that power, and the subjugation of our thoughts and our emotions to Hashem, that for sure is applicable to men and to women. But practically, it's the men who put on tefillin, although they tell us that Rashi's daughters also put on tefillin. Nowadays, if a woman would say, I want to put on tefillin, we'd be worried that there's a bit of haughtiness, that's saying, I'm on such a high level that I need to put on tefillin. If all the other Rebbetzins don't need to put on tefillin, then, are you better than them? There's that kind of thing as well. Sometimes when no one's doing the mitzvah, then there's no room to do that mitzvah. Okay, let's look at a bit of the tefillin and understand it. And I want to start by saying that you're going to see now in the tefillin that there are many aspects of the tefillin that are there according to the Zohar, the Kabbalah, to atone for the sin of the golden calf. The sin of the golden calf, the tefillin are to atone for that. And the thought being, we just saw in the Shulchan Aruch that the tefillin are about the unity of God. The sin of the golden calf represents idolatry. It is idolatry, which represents a belief in something else, some other power, other than God being the source of all power, the source of all energy, the source of everything. So the golden calf, idolatry, is the antithesis of tefillin. And tefillin contain many aspects to atone or to give us some way of undoing the sin of the golden calf. And what do I mean? Well, every aspect of the tefillin needs to come from a cow or from an ox, from the mother of the calf. Every aspect of the tefillin. And let me show you. I'll just try to put a pair of tefillin by the camera. Okay, so we have, it says here on the box, tefillin shel rosh. This is just a plastic cover that protects the tefillin. It's important to retain the squareness of the tefillin. And that's what that plastic is about. Now, I'm going to show you what comes from an ox. But perhaps before I do that, to show you a tefillin shel yad. This is a head tefillin. And these are hand tefillin. Okay, just to try to see the difference. The head tefillin in this hand has got it's 3 grooves, which actually makes it into 4 compartments. The hand tefillin are a complete solid square, cube. The head tefillin also have a shin on each side. The hand tefillin are just, again, a complete cube. The reference to that in the psukim is ukshartam leot al yadcha, ot in the singular, whereas when it comes to the head tefillin, totafot. This word totafot, Rashi says, is actually a combination of two, he says, African languages, tat and pat, which comes to 4. Tat is 2, and pat, he says, is 2. So interesting. I don't know which languages they are, but totafot are the tefillin shel rosh. I'll start with the tefillin shel rosh. So firstly, what comes from an ox? This whole box, actually it's called a bayit, is actually leather. It's hide. It's the hide of, again, a cow or an ox that is compressed into this shape. If you look carefully, there's some hairs sticking out here. And if you look at your tefillin tomorrow morning, you'll see that there are hairs that stick out, and they have to stick out. They are the hairs of the tail of the ox. The straps are the leather from the ox. The tefillin are sewn together, stitched together with sinew. It's not allowed to be normal cotton or normal thread or twine. It's the real sinew of an animal. And which animal? Once again, it has to come from a kosher animal, and we use that of a cow or an ox. I'll come back to the square a bit later. So that's all from the cow to atone for the sin of the golden calf. Inside the tefillin, well, yes, there's something inside. The tefillin are called a bayit. And what we need to do, or what we do, is we actually, if here's the tefillin, we open it up. Now this happens to be the tefillin of the hand. It's got one compartment. If I take out the tefillin of the head, again, the 4 compartments, and inside also 4 compartments, 4 chambers. Now, inside those chambers are the 4 different paragraphs that talk about the tefillin. So just as an example, this piece of parchment would have come from one of those chambers. Where did I put it? It would have come from one of these chambers, and obviously there's a specific order. Now I've got to get it out. Well, we have tweezers, and when you unroll it, you'll see one of the paragraphs. One of the paragraphs that speak about tefillin. Let's see which one I took out. This is actually V'haya im Shamoah. Now it's unbelievable to think that this has been written with a feather, and again on parchment. And where does the parchment come from? Once again, from the skin of the animal, the skin of the ox or the cow. Cloth, we call it cloth. So those are the different aspects of the tefillin that are there to atone for the sin of the golden calf. But obviously it's not just that by putting on the tefillin, so then idolatry is atoned for, but rather it's meant to remind us, and our constant, and I say that men need the reminder, the tangible reminder of putting this onto the head and subjugating our thoughts to the oneness of God and to the all-powerful might of God in terms of represented in his ability to take us out of Egypt and put us into Egypt. That's what undoes any thoughts of idolatry that heaven forbid there is another force. Just to show you, so we have as a scribe, we would have to have this sinew. This is, and I told you that we stitch the tefillin. So it comes already, ready made. We don't have to actually go kill an animal and try to dry out its veins. But then the string, it's, I suppose, like in the olden days when they had real fish gut. It came from the gut of the fish or wherever it came from, but it was real gut. This is real sinew that's used to tie the tefillin up. And then I told you also that we have the hair from the tail. So here's a wallop of hair. If anybody needs for their shaitel, I don't suggest it. It's very coarse. It's from the tail of a cow, or even it could from a young cow. We've got in our community a farmer, Ezra Berger. So he brings me a whole lot of, these are his presents that he brings to the rabbi. He brings me a whole lot of cow and ox hair, which I then have to wash properly because it's got a lovely smell. And it's used on the tefillin. In fact, where is it used on the tefillin? In those chambers that we spoke about before, where we put the different, here there's the one that I've got stuck in there. They are wrapped around with the hair, so they're kept tight within that hair, and then they need to be sewn together. Maybe just one more point about this sewing together, which I find fascinating. So that's what the bottom of the tefillin looks like when I've got that sinew. And if you notice, firstly, the halacha is that has to be a perfect square. Also, there are 3 stitches on each side. Could you see that? Now, that's not a coincidence, because it represents the way that the Jews camped around the Mishkan. 3 flags on each side of the Mishkan. It has to be done this way. And I think that the point, I remember hearing a beautiful shiur from the late Rabbi Pinkus, that the idea that when we camped in the desert around the Mishkan, it represented the fact that the central point of Jewish existence needs to be the Mishkan. Mineged saviv le'ohel moed yachanu. The center of our lives needs to be the Mishkan. Obviously, in terms of the importance, the role that it plays. That's the center of our life. Not just that we have our lives and then we somehow fit the Mishkan, nowadays the shul, into the structure of our life. But in fact, Jewish existence was always centered around the Mishkan. Saviv le'ohel moed, around the ohel moed yachanu. And that's the way it needs to be today as well. So those are some of the ideas. Maybe just one more thing for show and tell, and then you could ask some questions. So here is what we write with, right? It's a feather, and it's a hard feather. So we try to use turkey, which is actually difficult to find in South Africa. Apparently they don't grow so well. So I normally get these feathers from Israel, and then we need to cut them down until we are able to make them into a quill, right? And obviously, we would never even think of using the feather of a non-kosher animal, like a hardy dog. In fact, one of the parashas says, "Leman tihiyeh Torat Hashem beficha," in order that the Torah of Hashem will be in your mouth. So from there, we also learn that's the more revealed part of the halacha as to why we need to use a kosher animal, because it needs to come from what is called mutar beficha, what is allowed in your mouth. Even the ink. I'm not suggesting that we make kiddush over the ink, but it comes from leaves and ingredients that would be edible, would be kosher to eat. That's all the requirements going into the tefillin. I'd like to hand over for some questions, and I hope that you've got many questions so that we could keep the ball rolling.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Rabbi Uzvolk. If anyone does have a question, please, I say, Maya, if you just unmute yourself.
Rabbi, can I ask a question as well, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Just wait for Maya, and then Aubrey, you're up after Maya, and then whoever
I'm in the dark.
else.
I'm sorry, I'm in the dark. We've had a power failure.
Yeah, so I did get apologies. A few people had to log off because of power failure. Thank God it's being recorded. Maya, you're still on mute. If you want to unmute yourself. Okay, in the meantime, Aubrey, you ask until Maya unmutes.
Okay.
Go for it, Aubrey.
Hi, Rabbi Uzvolk. First question I'd like to know. I do believe, from what I've learned, is that a sofar should go to mikveh before he starts to write. It's safe for Torah for sure, but I'm sure it does. It also not apply to tefillin and mezuzah.
Absolutely.
Number one. Okay. And number two, if you're not in the best frame of mind, like a kohen, if he's not besimcha, I believe he shouldn't duchen. Now, if you're not besimcha, should you write as a sofar?
So, Aubrey, not to be besimcha is easy because you just take a little bit of Prozac and you're fine. No, that's a joke. That's a joke. But the truth is, Aubrey, that when I write, I get to such a beautiful state of mind. I find it so calming that to me, I get into a kind of just a very, very relaxed mode when I'm writing, even though it's a bit strange because you've got to be so particular. There is a thing though, that if you've had something to drink, and I'm talking about hard alcohol, then you must not write.
I mean, it's the same thing surely about saying Sim Shalom and Shalom Rav. I mean, also when it comes to the duchening thing and
like
kohanim,
the kohanim.
Yeah.
And the idea of going to the mikveh maybe relates to that, because it's really got to do with writing Hashem's name. Before you write Hashem's name, then you need to go to a mikveh.
I think, Aubrey, thank you for that. But I think just to remember that, please God, next week we'll be having a second talk from Rabbi Uzvolk, and that will be more general regarding the role of a sofer. So maybe those questions will come more to the fore next week, and Rabbi Uzvolk will also focus on the Sefer Torah. So maybe just if we can just limit the questions regarding tefillin. If anyone has other questions regarding tefillin, anything, I know, Maya, if you want to try unmute again.
I would like to ask, it's Ari.
Thank you for showing me your name.
Rabbi, thank you for the talk. You spoke about tefillin in general, but because I've got a brother-in-law who is a Chabadnik, he's got 2 pairs of tefillin. Is there a difference in the way they are made up and the way they are written?
Thank you for the question. It's funny that you should ask. So it goes as follows. I told you that in the tefillin there are 4 paragraphs. So 2 of them you know, Ve'ahavta and Ve'hayim Shamoah. The other 2, if you look at your Siddur, you'll actually find them at the beginning of the davening. There are those that say them at the beginning of davening when they're putting on the tefillin, those other 2 paragraphs. Some people actually say it at the end. And the difference between the 2 main pairs of tefillin that people wear, Rashi and his grandson Rabbeinu Tam, has got to do with the order in which the parashas are put into the tefillin. So classically, if I look at a pair of tefillin, going from right to left, this right side would be the first paragraph that mentions tefillin in the Torah. Kadesh li kol bechor. The second one is V'haya ki aviacha, the second paragraph. Then Shema, then V'haya. That's Rashi's tefillin. Rabbeinu Tam's tefillin switches around the last two. He goes Kadesh li kol bechor V'haya ki aviacha, next to V'haya im shamoa, and then Shema on the outside. So that's the difference between the tefillin. Now, this is quite serious stuff because the order is really important. So if the parashas were put in the incorrect order, then you have not fulfilled the mitzvah. Now, common Jewish practice is to follow the opinion of Rashi, but there were people that were worried about the opinion of Rabbeinu Tam, and Hasidim took it on to worry about the opinion of Rabbeinu Tam, so that they'll wear, I'm a Chassid, will wear the Rashi tefillin throughout davening, and at the end of davening take them off and put on Rabbeinu Tam's tefillin, just in case the halacha is like him. Don't worry though, because you've got very great people such as the Vilna Gaon who didn't put on 2 pairs of tefillin. So if ever you'll be called to task as to why you didn't do it, you'll say, listen, I was standing on shoulders of people greater than myself. By the way, there are 2 other opinions of how to put in the scrolls. In other words, do you put them facing the person that's reading them, like I said, right to left, or is it facing the person who's putting them on, right to left? Those are 2 other pairs of tefillin. In fact, there are some people, and I've seen it with my own eyes, who wear 2 pairs of tefillin at the same time. They put on 2 shel yads and 2 shel roshes, Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam. A little bit of an answer.
It's a good answer. I just want to ask another question, if I may, Rodney.
Please.
In the Eretz, I see a lot of people, especially in Yerushalayim and in Beit Shemesh, walking around with tefillin during the day. They don't take them off.
So originally, it was actually supposed to be that people would wear tefillin the whole day. As a result of our inability to keep focus and remember the sanctity of the tefillin, number 1. Number 2, to have clean bodies, and excuse the expression, but to let off wind while wearing tefillin is considered not only inappropriate, it's sinful. So we are considered, it already says in the Shulchan Aruch, that we are on a lower level, and we can't control our bodies, and we can't control for sure our thoughts, and therefore the average person wears them just for the davening, and truth be told, we find it even difficult to focus even during that small amount of time. But there are righteous people who wear the tefillin the whole day. Obviously, they take them off when they need to go to the toilet.
You have to make a brocha when you put them on again after going to the toilet?
If it was after going to the toilet, yes, because it would be considered an interruption because you were not allowed to wear them in the toilet. But if you took them off, let's say, just say simply to eat, then you wouldn't have to say a bracha again.
Can I have a go now?
Hello.
Please.
Hi. I actually do quite a bit of traveling with my tefillin. I go with them in many places, and they come up and down with me to Joburg, to Vereniging, to Cape Town, sometimes even on flights. So both my questions involve especially traveling and transporting tefillin. They're not usually in a set place, in a shore or at home. So my first question would be what's the smallest size you can have tefillin? One of the things I always have in my tefillin is, could I get a very small pair that would be more convenient to travel, that I could keep in a place? That's number one. And number two is, actually, I only realized this, I know a lot of tefillin, the rules are laid out in brachot, as far as I recall. I just recently started studying brachot, and it's like, can you take them into a bathroom? So, for example, I actually remember the time I was after reading this, I remembered I was in Israel, and I had my tefillin in my backpack, but then I needed to go to the bathroom. Would it be okay to have my tefillin in my backpack and go to the bathroom? Or where could you put them down if you needed to put them down, and in what circumstances would you need to set them aside? And is there a specific bag or carrier that you need to have them? So on those lines of traveling and tefillin.
Thank you. Beautiful questions. So firstly, nowadays with heavy machinery, we are able to make the tefillin as big and strong as we do. Our grandparents didn't have such big tefillin, and a lot of times they were actually much smaller. They couldn't compress leather, such hard leather as we can. And in fact, what they did is they just took a piece of almost parchment, as soft as parchment, and folded it in the shape, the mold of a box, almost when they do paperwork. I don't know what it's called. There's a special art where you
like origami.
Thank you, origami. And they do that with a parchment and create a box, and they put that box over leather. Those were very thin tefillin. The outer skin was one skin, or echad, but it was put over a smaller mold or box made out of leather. And it was difficult to make bigger tefillin. So they used to wear smaller tefillin. The problem is that I showed you the paragraphs that we're writing. And, if I want to remind you, to fit that small writing onto a small piece of parchment, and you're still writing with your hand with a feather, it is very, very difficult to be exact. It used to be done, and it's amazing. There are tefillin that I've opened up from our grandparents and parents' generation, and they're amazing tefillin. Sometimes the only problem with them is that they're faded and they're not black anymore. They need to be black. But nowadays, when people are, I have to say that even the scribes, everybody's rushing to make more money. So they're writing as quick as they can. And when they're writing small and things are going to touch each other, it's not going to be kosher. So small tefillin is very hard to find. Kosher small tefillin, you can find them, and like I said, those people that actually put on 2 pairs of tefillin, they have to be smaller, otherwise you can't fit them on. But if you want to get a kosher small pair of tefillin, you'll actually pay more than for a larger pair. That's in terms of the size of the tefillin. And I've got tiny tefillin. I think that over the different pogroms and concentration camps where Yidden hid their tefillin, we could understand why they had very small tefillin. Thank God nowadays we don't have to have such small tefillin. In terms of travel, you've got to be very careful that your tefillin are not left in the sun, because it's a natural hide and it will warp, and it won't be a perfect cube or square anymore, and they'll be pasul. Then in terms of the toilet, so if you need to go to the toilet, the halacha is that the object, let's say the siddur, sometimes a person has got a tefillat haderech, that's also got Hashem's name on the tefillah Tederech HaSidur, or even a little card, right? And for sure, tefillin, how do you deal with it when you're traveling and you're going to need to go into a bathroom? So you should have two coverings for it, and actually neither of those coverings should be a covering that is designated for the tefillin. So, we have nowadays these tefillin bags, but they are designated, like a tefillin bag like this is designated for the tefillin. So that doesn't help. That's not called one covering. You should put this with a tefillin inside, into a shopping bag, and maybe wrap that in a jersey in your bag. And then it's still in your suitcase. Then you could go into the toilets. If possible, still maybe leave it by the taps and not actually take it into the cubicle. But if you're worried that they're going to get stolen, you'd actually be okay with that as well, because you've got the double covering.
Hello, Rabbi.
Hi.
Yeah. In terms of, the other day I had one of my children, Graham's tefillin in the bag, the zipper broke. So I removed it. Well, he took out the tefillin. Where can he leave that tefillin during the day while I repaired the zipper? Can you just leave it in any bag, or does it have to be in a specific place, or how does it work?
You can put it into any bag. You could put it into any bag. It's a good idea before you use a bag to stipulate that you're not designating this bag as a permanent use, because otherwise that bag could also require shamus when you're finished with it. But what's really important is that you keep them safe. Like sometimes even a Tupperware might be a better idea, or like a lunch tin or something that is closed, that just you don't want them to get messed up.
Great questions. Anyone else with a question?
Yeah, just one or two quick things. Just a point out that years ago I noticed happened. It's fine to say keep tefillin out of the heat, but the other thing is you shouldn't put the rush onto wet hair, because it will also cause a problem to the cloth at the bottom of the box where you've got yours. It causes it to warp just as much and damages the tefillin. So regularly on wet hair is not a good idea.
Exactly. Gel, wet hair, perspiration, these are not good things for tefillin. And just on a small thing, these tefillin, as an example, are also called the pshutot. And if you'll notice, it's actually a very thin piece. So this thin piece can very easily get damaged by perspiration and moisture. The gasot, which are the more expensive tefillin, are made in such a way that they are more solid. I'm trying to find a pair. Yeah, here's a pair of gasot. You'll see that this piece is much thicker. It's actually all one piece, as opposed to, let's go this again, this one. So these would be called pshutot, and these are the gasot, the one in this hand.
How to actually stitch it closed tightly, because I was told from a colleague of yours, I know you it's supposed to check your tefillin once every 7 years, and I was told by a colleague of yours, your tefillin are magnificent. Don't open them. Don't ever have them checked. If they are kosher, that is fine, because you can never close them the same again.
So it's an interesting question, and I'm not sure that I have the answer, to be honest. On the one hand, it says in the laws of Elul that pious people, men of deeds, Anshe Maaseh, they have their tefillin and their mezuzahs checked in the month of Elul. And we know that there are people that are strict every Elul to actually have their tefillin and their mezuzahs checked. On the other hand, there is a concept called in halacha, strict halacha, called a chazaka. A chazaka is when you create a status quo, and you're allowed to halachically rely on a status quo unless there's something to indicate that there's been a change. So if you know that your tefillin are kosher, you have them checked and the scribe took them out with difficulty, or even you got them from a reliable place and they were stitched up and there's nothing that's changed, no paint has cracked, nothing's warped, you're allowed to halachically assume that the status quo has remained the same. The chazaka is that they're the same. And as you say, when you open them, you're never going to be able to get that perfection of them being when you close them again. So I haven't answered your question because those are the two sides to it. But perhaps the answer is that if there's no reason to assume that something's happened, they weren't left in the sun, they weren't wet, they weren't bumped, you don't need to open up the tefillin again.
Stuart?
Rabbi, thank you very much. How long does it take you to write up tefillin?
For you, I'll do it. No, I'm joking. So it's a good question. There are 4 paragraphs in the tefillin. As I said, 4 paragraphs in the tefillin shel yad. I want to just try to get this again so that you could see it. So these are still from small tefillin. So there's about 4 of these, okay? 4 paragraphs like this. That's in the head tefillin, and in the hand tefillin, the same 4, but written on one piece of parchment. So the answer is that it depends on how quickly you can write. For me, when I write a mezuzah, which is 2 paragraphs, it takes me 4 to 5 hours. So if I'm going to write 4 paragraphs, it's going to be about 10 hours. And if I'm going to write now 8 paragraphs, it's close to 20 hours. And then if you make one mistake, you've got to start from the beginning. Like a drop of ink falls on a letter, or you miss out a letter. You can't go back and just fill it in. So yeah. Assuming that somebody's much faster than me, let's say they could do the whole thing in 10 hours. I don't believe it could be done in less than that.
Do you use a magnifying glass?
I don't. I find that when I take off my glasses and use my naked eye, it's easier for me. But there are people, you know, those dentist glasses. Somebody gave me one of those pairs, those like special glasses like that. Sometimes when I check and I'm not sure of something, I'll actually take a picture on my phone and then use it as a magnifying glass to see if, you know, if it's really a problem.
Thank you.
Any final question?
So you are not allowed to correct anything on the cloth of a mezuzah or tefillin. But on a Torah, why should you be able to then?
Aubrey,
Okay.
keep it for next week. Aubrey, keep it for next week. Keep it for next week. Anything related to just for tefillin, if we could just wrap up with one final question. I think you've covered it all, Rabbi Uzvolk. Thank you so much. Again, I have recorded it because I know some people, there was a power outage in some of the areas, so we'll make it available and certainly to you as well. Thank you so much for your time, for sharing, and we look forward, please God, to the more general topic, general talk next week about the role of a software, all that goes into it, and maybe honing in a bit more on a safer Torah. So again, thank you so much for your time and for sharing with us this evening.
Absolute pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rabbi.
If you come to shul tomorrow morning, you'll be able to try them on.
Yes,
Chodesh
exactly.
Tov, everyone. Chodesh Tov.
A guten Chodesh.
Chodesh Tov.